Good evening and welcome. I hope we have enough seats for everyone. We certainly are pleased and happy to welcome each of you to the City Council chamber tonight for our initial city budget review. We will go through a limited agenda of outside agencies, Evergreen Cemetery, city schools, the water and sewer budget, and tentative budgets for several of our departments before adjourning this meeting. And then we will go to our council meeting at 7 o'clock. Hopefully you will not have to stay for all of that, or most of you will not have to stay for all of that. I do want to recognize Mary Scales. I believe Mary just slipped in. Where's Mary? Mary, former council member, I want to recognize you and tell you thank you for your service, continued service to the community, and we welcome you tonight. Thanks for being with us. Mr. Haley or Mr. Lyons, is anything you want to go over with us as it pertains to our budget before we get into our budget review?
Mayor and Council, I believe it would benefit the process and the future to let Mr. Lyons lead this budget process from the staff side tonight. And having said that, Rob.
That was a quick bailout, wasn't it?
Hey, did you get that from Mr. Honeycutt? Any questions?
You're going to yield to Mr. Honeycutt.
Mr. Lyons.
Yes, sir. Mayor, what we wanted to do is, I've distributed a memo to you before we sat down this evening that I'd like to go over very briefly. We brought you the budget May the 14th. Since that time, a number of things have developed, and we wanted to bring you up to speed about changes that we've identified and are now recommending to you before you begin the budget process, so you can start from that point in time. Let me start off with, I think, the one item that has had a lot of discussion and is certainly very important to all of us and all of our city employees. And it had to do with the reductions in workforce. The proposed budget identified over $500,000 in funding related to a reduction in workforce. We made these recommendations not lightly, but with a realization of where we were with the economy, and it was a very difficult decision, and one we did not want to bring to you, but it was in the proposed budget. However, since we brought you the budget, we have received higher than expected revenues from county shared bond proceeds. We are now recommending directing an additional $1 million of this money that we did not have previously toward debt service. This will allow us to reduce the general fund's contribution to the debt service fund, and as a result, we are suspending our recommendation to lay off employees. Although we are no longer recommending the layoffs, we will have to be even more vigilant in deciding to fill positions that become vacant or by reassigning personnel from their current position to a similar position in another department. Additionally, please also note that any major change in state shared revenues may cause this situation to be revisited. We will also continue to monitor tax collections closely. Should actual revenues begin to drop significantly below budgeted revenues, the possibility of reductions in workforce may be unavoidable. However, based on the current set of circumstances, we believe we can avoid this for now. This was something before we started budget we wanted to bring to you so we could understand that's where we're at right now. I have identified several other changes that relate to other city departments. I've done that in bullet format. We may want to talk about those as we get into the individual department budgets. But the net result of those modifications from the other departmental changes would bring your unforeseen, which is currently budgeted at $500,000. If you approve the changes that are outlined in this 3-page memo, the unforeseen contingencies would actually increase to $1,104,535 as of today. Be happy to answer any questions.
Well, that's certainly good news, Mr. Lyons, and I'm sure the council joins me in thanking you for your diligence and certainly the persistence of all our staff in trying to accommodate this year's budget and these reductions in positions, which will not currently, but based on best estimates, not be necessary. I'm sure the council appreciates that, and I think you got a little dose of that from those assembled just a minute ago. So, anything else you'd like to go over with us before we go to our outside agencies?
No, sir.
All right. If there any questions from council before we go to outside agencies? All right, Vice Mayor.
Mayor, if you will, before we get into that, I know typically in the past, this is always an exciting time to see all those, our charitable organizations and our volunteers that are before us tonight. And typically, we go through each outside agency and ask them to respond, and I know that takes up a lot of their valuable time. And looking at this year's budget, I noticed that there were no increases in any of the funding levels from any of them. I would ask the council, instead of not wasting their time, but having them stay here longer than what they would typically do, since there's no additional funds to be added to anyone's budget, we could just ask the council if they have any questions from any particular outside agency or department, if they would request for those to be looked at on an individual basis. If that makes any sense for the council, I don't know what your wishes are, but...
All right. Since we do have outside agency requests, and I believe those are in the, I think it's about $119,000. All the requests will be that have been made and been budgeted. Council members, what are your wishes as to whether to go through those outside agencies individually?
I think that the Vice Mayor has a good suggestion. I know in years since I've been on the council, we started out with asking representatives from each one of the agencies to give a brief presentation, and we've been able to streamline that to where we've called them out line by line. But given a year that funding is all based upon last year's budgeted amounts being frozen, and I think the Vice Mayor has a good suggestion, and if there are specific agencies that we need to hear from or have questions about, we can handle it that way. But I don't think there's really a need to call them line by line as we have in years past.
All right. Well, with that said, then, is there a motion that we move on from outside agencies and go on into Evergreen Cemetery? And that way, that'll release all of the outside agency individuals who are here.
You might want to, I don't know if any of us have any we want to talk about, but...
Does any...
Go on to Evergreen Cemetery sounds bad.
All right. Yes, Ms.
I would
McFarland.
just want to say that, we all hope next year is better. I think we do every year. We hope that next year is better, but I know from the outside organizations where I serve on different boards, we know that each of you are having tough times with your budgets, much like that we are, and we appreciate what you do for the community, and we appreciate what you do for the citizens of Murfreesboro.
Yeah, I think this group is what makes Murfreesboro special. Your hard work and your volunteers and what you do for those in our community who are in need or less fortunate is very well appreciated by the community. And we want to obviously take this time to thank you for what you do.
All right. If you are here with an outside agency, one of our charitable agencies, then you will not have to stay any longer. You're welcome to stay if you want, but we will be going through Evergreen Cemetery, the city school budget, water and sewer, and then Parks and Recreation, golf course, airport, solid waste, fleet service, community development, senior citizens, cable television. Thank you. Thank you.
Y'all can go out and eat now. When we going to eat, Mayor?
Well, you're closer.
I'm close.
You're closer now.
Clean the room out.
All right, council members, as these folks are departing, you have before you the tentative budget of Evergreen Cemetery. If you would bring that to the front, and if there are any questions regarding Evergreen Cemetery's budget, you'll see their total revenues and expenditures come to $493,200. Are there any questions on the Evergreen Cemetery budget?
Mayor, no questions, but I would like to say I think that they do a good job at Evergreen maintaining that cemetery on a very streamlined amount of funds, and it's just very well maintained. I appreciate how frugal they are with the money that's provided.
Certainly. General Roberts is here, and I think it's interesting, the council applied a $250,000, I think, grant to them for some road work and some safety work with the trees that are currently at Evergreen Cemetery. So we look forward to a successful year for Evergreen Cemetery. Any questions on Evergreen Cemetery? Thank you. All right, let's go to the city school budget at this time. I notice our city school board chair, Mary Wade, is here. Thank you, Mary, for being here. And Ms. Mathis, I think I saw you with Mr. Anderson. Appreciate you being here. Thank you. You have from Ms. Mathis a cover letter explaining some of the changes and additions to their tentative school budget. That budget's in the amount of $51,532,000, an increase of about $28,000 over the current fiscal year. They're maintaining a pupil-teacher ratio at 1 to 20 students throughout the system. Step and degree change increases for licensed employees in the amount of about $450,000. Health insurance up about 7%. Some additional costs for science textbook adoption and replacement books. And they have transferred about $1.1 million from their fund balance in order to balance this tentative budget. I'm sure there'll be some other numbers coming from the state, which may, in the immediate future, change those numbers, but I think that's what we have to date. Any questions or comments regarding the Murfreesboro City School budget? The tentative budget as it is presented. Ms. Mathis? A question regarding enrollment, your most recent numbers compared to what your projections have been in previous years, a little background, if you will, and kind of where are we going on enrollment in our K through 6 system, plus knowing that we have a preschool facility at Bellwood, and I forgot just for a minute there, if you just comment a little bit about attendance and the population of your school system at this time.
We'll be glad to. As you've already indicated, we are keeping a status quo enrollment of 6,890 students. Actually, this was our 5th month enrollment, and our 5th month enrollment from this year to our enrollment last year had only increased about 14 students. We have not added any teachers into this budget, and we're actually able to reduce some teachers from last year's budget. That's the reason that our budget increase has not gone up more than the $27,000 that you saw. So right now we are seeing pretty much leveled enrollment. and don't want to put anything in there that doesn't represent what our history has been. Of course, prior to this, we've had an annual increase of about 3%. So whether this will remain the same, we really have no idea, but wanted to reflect pretty much our last year's growth.
No increases, obviously, in enrollment will affect your state funding, is that correct?
The state money follows the students, so we have put in fact, we've gotten estimates from the state, and we have put in the budget what the state estimates are. I think it's about $100,000 less than last year. But I anticipate by the time we get our July final that it will go back up and be just about what it is this year.
How's the preschool program going, and how do you perceive that funding from the state will be maintained for the preschool programs?
The state plans to maintain its funding. In fact, they've increased each class amount they've sent us $525 increase for each class over there. We have 12 lottery classes and governor pilot and lottery classes. I anticipate the governor really pushing for that. One of the things he's encouraging us to do with our ARRA money, the stimulus money, is to use it for early childhood programs. So I certainly don't think he's going to do anything to cut the programs that are already in place.
And those are voluntary attendance at those?
They are definitely voluntary. People get on the waiting list to get in. We do have criteria they have to meet, and it's based on income level for the governor's classes.
Right. Discovery School. Talk a little bit about Discovery School and the results that you perceive there, and how the funding is kind of going through Discovery School.
Well, the Discovery School is funded just like any of our other K-6 schools. There's really no difference whatsoever. And, obviously, we have a lot of parent interest. Criteria must be met there. It's based on a matrix of achievement tests and various other factors, developmental factors in children to get in. And the Discovery School is just another school as far as I'm concerned in terms of funding. There's absolutely no difference in the way it's funded.
And are there slots open there?
No, there are not. Not right now. We have pretty well filled every slot, and we have a waiting list. We have a lot of interest in that school.
All right. Other questions from the council? What about, I know your enrollment has appeared flat. In the past, you have had property inventory that you held for a new school. We've built a certain number of new schools in the last 7 years. You feel like for the next several years, based on what you see this year in flat enrollment, that we're well suited to serve the residents of Murfreesboro with the K-6 school campus sites that we have to date?
We are. I always feel like it's good to have a piece of land ready, just in case we do have growth. Whenever the best time is to purchase that land, I think is when we should go ahead and make a purchase. I think planning ahead is one of the strengths that this council and our board has always shown. And if a good piece of land comes on the market at a price that we feel like that we can, that's better than our typical market price, I would like to see us go ahead and buy that and have it ready. Location. I think now we might have a chance for a site in a really good location. And I would hate for us to miss an opportunity if one were to come up. Right now, because of status quo enrollment, I have certainly not pushed the button on that. Otherwise, you probably would be hearing our board and hearing from us on this topic.
Mr. Washington serves very well on as our liaison to the school board. He may have some comments he'd like to make while we're considering their budget.
No, not much, but I've been very impressed with Mr. Gary Anderson and Golina Bell working on the budgets and how they deal with moving the money around and taking care of business. So They do a wonderful job, and the teachers are wonderful, the principals are wonderful, and we have an excellent system. It's impressive.
Well, and I appreciate your comments there because we do have an excellent staff and we're no stronger than our staff. And because of them, we have been able to keep our budget, not coming to you asking for any increase, even though we're not increasing in enrollment. Nevertheless, we are having to pay steps and degree changes to teachers. So that is an increase, and I think to be able to come and to not ask for a tax increase from our taxpayers, to find ways that we can reduce the budget in other places, I think is a real credit to our staff. And I'm very proud of the budget that we bring you today, because we do have, as you've noted, about $786,000 in there in not only step increases, but workers' comp increases that we have to pay, unemployment, health insurance, all those that are employee-related. So we have tried to maintain that. And I want to thank Mr. Washington for his continued support to our board and our school system.
They have all kinds of maintenance, repairing the roofs at Black Fox, and all kind of things and contingencies that come up. And I've been impressed with how they've, because your operational costs are something sometimes you have no control of. Utility costs, all those kind of things. You know, we know what utilities have done. At least I do anyway. Phone calls I get, but and they've done a wonderful job.
Well, I would like to comment, since he's made that comment, on the forward thinking of this council to go ahead and put about $500,000 up front on our geothermal system. The payback, instead of being 8 years, has turned out to be 2 years. So I think that is phenomenal. We'd like to convert all of our schools now to geothermal. It's just that there's not a package out there to do this that would make it easy, because we do have to continue to occupy the schools. But thank you for your forward thinking on moving ahead on that, because it's always pretty hard to spend money on the front end. But we've recouped it so quickly that now we're feeling really good about it.
Is Pitter?
John Pitter.
That's our only.
All right, any other questions on the city schools tentative budget? If not, Ms. Mathis, Mr. Anderson, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. Chairman Wade, thank you. Appreciate your attendance and the valuable time that you share with our school board in your position. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
This time we'll consider the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer tentative budget. Mr. Kirchner, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. You have transmitted to you, May 15th was the budget that the board considered. Tonight I'm transmitting to you a slightly revised budget. I think there's about $4,100 difference. We had additional expense that we had left out. My cover letter pretty much reviews all those. I have about a 7-slide PowerPoint I can present, or if you have questions, I'll ask those, whichever you'd like to do to proceed.
If you have a PowerPoint you want to show it, that'd be great. I think our viewers would like to see that.
I know it. I'm sorry.
Darren, can you help him work the?
It's the computer. It's booting up.
You want me to stay? You stay away from it.
I hear Mr. Griffith
Just
saying
on fire.
whatever back there.
Doug's our IT guy.
Hey, we're not allowing, when Mr. Griffith has to present, we're not going to allow change orders tonight, are we? No.
This is the 09-010 budget, and we'll look at our budget to actual for the total debt service. The difference is basically $1.8 million approximately below budget, and the main reason for that is we budget the schedule of interest on our TML variable rates that they gave us at the inception of the budget. They run about 4 to 4.5%, but as you know, it's a variable rate and we get less. We have a less of an interest expense, so we've saved about $1.8 million in that interest expense. The principal is fixed and paid. We just paid most of our principal payments in May. Our total reserve income, it's down this year. Most of that's due to the less than expected connections that we've had, and that's just the economy that we're in. That's about $1.6 million below. That doesn't affect our operating. That's just money that would go into reserve to do other projects from connections. Our capital expenditures were around $900,000 below budget. We started slowing down our capital budget in some of the expenditures we did since we saw that our less than expected revenues, and it'll probably be a little higher than that by the end of the year because we'll close out some work orders that will then be posted to our capital expenditures. The total operation and maintenance were the difference is accounted for primarily due to the increased power and chemical costs. Like Mr. Councilman Washington said, those are things you really don't have control over, and we had a really high electric bill at our wastewater plant. Our payroll budget, we're $288,000 below actual, and a lot of that's due to we have vacant positions, and we really managed our overtime and scheduling of our employees. That's kind of a review of as we budget to actual. The total outlay expense is about $4.3 million under. The schedule of income is about 3.8, so we're to the good about $574,000 on our budget to actual. Now we'll look at our budget for this coming year. Budget to our actual is the differences accounted for adjusting to the interest to our fixed rate. Like I said, I budgeted what the schedule was in our initial inception of our loans, and you never know when they can go up. And in the past, they have gone up for short periods, and then they come back down. Our total reserve income, I'm say it's going to be level. We're about level right now, and I expect the same to occur next year. Even though we are adding an increase to our fees, I think still will be probably at a level reserve income off our connection fees. Capital expenditures, we will want to continue to do our sewer rehabilitation. We'll maintain that. We did reduce it by the overall by $250,000. But if you recall, we're going to start doing some service line rehabilitation. Total operation and maintenance, we're above budget, and that's mainly due to our power and chemical equipment maintenance costs that we've seen historically. Payroll budget is $49,000 to actual, but really it's $338,000 from what we budgeted last year, and most of that is the vacant positions we didn't fill, and we have a retiree that comes off the payroll this year, so that makes a big difference. So when you look at the previous budget, we're going to be at $340,000 less. That's like a recap of the total debt, reserve income, capital expenditures, and O&M and payroll for the upcoming budget. Now, answer any questions if you had any at this time.
Any questions?
Joe, as with the other departments, there are no pay increases, and
That's
longevity
correct.
pay is frozen at last year's rates.
Yes,
Is that correct?
that's correct. All the vacancies were zero budgeted. There's no longevity, and everybody's frozen in their step.
And as a matter of fact, I think the retiree you're referring to is Mr. Cass.
Yes.
And instead of finding a replacement for him, Darren's going to start doing double duty.
Yes, sir.
In that regard, so that we can save that expense. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a senior plant operator, assistant director, I believe, a maintenance construction worker, and there's one other, I believe, that was in there. Another position that is vacant that we won't fill.
We've known Mr. Gore was underutilized for some time now, and it's possibly a good thing for his...
Keep him busy, keep him out of trouble.
That's exactly right. He doesn't have enough meetings to go to, I know that. Joe, your third line down on your second page under the descriptions of your budget comparing this fiscal year and the upcoming fiscal year shows an additional expense under customer service. We all know regarding utilities, and I don't say this just for you, but for all utilities, whether it's the franchise utilities that we deal with in the city or anywhere else, customer service is a very important issue, especially if the person is dealing with you right then.
Yes.
So give me a little idea of what that additional expense for customer service is, or what steps maybe you're taking to work through any customer service issues you may have.
Well, some of that is of course, our bad debt and our return checks and things like that we have in you'll see later in the budget or in the resolutions that one of the ways we're looking at increasing our check fees for return checks based on, right now I think it's $20, and we're going to go what the city utilizes as $30. Then we're also looking at when people are disconnected and we have to go out and reconnect them, that's an additional expense, and so we're looking at increasing those fees for when someone is cut off for non-payment, when we go back out and have to connect them. Sometimes we have to go 2 or 3 times, and that is an added expense. And so we're looking at increasing those fees to accommodate some of that added expense we have for that administration of those accounts. And, of course, there's just bad debt that we have. It's increased somewhat over the years. It's been a low percentage, less than 1%, but with the time it's creeped up. If I could have the rest of the PowerPoint. When you look at our budget-to-budget total outlay and expense, we're about $1 million under last year. The amount of water used, though, is less than last year. So we had less revenue because of the less usage. And I think some of it is the economy. There's some plants that are slower and reduced their production. There's furloughs and things like that. Some places have closed, and you've got some of that. In the construction industry, you really used a lot of water with their concrete and the plumbing and things that they did. So that was a big segment that we've lost for the time being. And the other thing is climactic. It depends on the rainfall. If you have a very dry summer months, then you'll have more usage than you would if it's you have more rainfall. The revenue that we looked at, in order to cover the budget, we needed another $2.5 million based on the projections of our usage. I did allow a small percentage for growth, 2%, in order to balance the budget, we needed a 80 cent per 100 cubic foot increase in our sewer side. Our water system is pretty much static because we're bound by consolidated utility districts. So the growth and the increase is really in the wastewater side, and that's where a lot of the expense is also. So that's what we recommended on that, and that's 60 cents for the sanitary sewer service charge, and 20 cents for the operation and maintenance fee, for a combined 80 cents. The recommendations.
What would that be on a typical bill, residential bill?
On page, if you look on page 11, there's a comparison. In a 600 cubic foot bill, which would be about an average, it'd be $3.60 a month. Minimum bill would be 40 cents a month increase. Most of our customers are less than 1,000 cubic feet, and on 1,000 cubic feet, it would be $6.80 a month. Percentage-wise, from a low of 2% to a high of about 13% on the higher end. We did look at a rate designed similar to what we did last year, is to increase or decrease the allowance for the minimum bill, but that would have been like a $6.50 increase on the lower end users, and I could not see in this time that on the low end, although it is something that our rate study indicated we should do, but we didn't think it would be something right now at this time, the way things are going. Also, our rate increase in our connection fees for water, $250 for water, $250 for sewer, to make them $1,200 for water and $2,550. The rate study we did indicated that we could was justifiable was $1,700 for water and $3,300 for sewer. So over time we can look at increasing that. We also adopting a cross-connection fee schedule. Basically, it's $35 for your first connection or for your first inspection. We have 3 in our cross-connection area. It's mandated by the state that we have a cross-connection control program, and they have to be annually tested. And we have over 3,000 units in the system now, so it's quite an endeavor. That would increase about $133,000 in revenue. Doesn't cover the whole cost, but it covers a portion of it. And then the other adopted changes for our customer service related fees I mentioned earlier. This also is the stormwater fund balance review, in that basically the numbers for our stormwater revenue, about $2.1 million through April. We're looking for, we have upcoming expenses that we've done and obligations to some of the city budget for some infrastructure repairs. We paid the general fund, I think it was about half of the expense for the NPDS permit administration from the engineering standpoint, and we've got about $250,000 in stream improvements. For the budget, the total debt service, this next year we're going to pay the balance of the fund to the city, the $665,000. So that increases what we budgeted last year, about $150,000. Our capital projects, we're looking at doing about $931,000, and a lot of that is anticipated projects. We had an engineering firm look at the Lytle Creek Basin. The Lytle Creek is an impaired stream, and the purpose of our stormwater fund and for generating the revenues is to make stream improvements and improvements in our stormwater quality so that the streams come off the 303D list, which is an impaired stream. And so we have identified Lytle Creek Basin is the first area we're working into. Capital expenditures. This past year we purchased some large equipment. This year we won't have the large expenditure for that equipment. We had to cut the vac truck, the big blue truck that goes around and vacuums out the catch basins. That was a couple $100,000 expenditure. There was a pickup truck in there also. Our operation and maintenance, that's basically the cost to operate the vac truck and the personnel that is doing the work in the field. Our payroll budget, we have total taken off the people from the water and sewer budget to the payroll budget of the stormwater that are 100% into that. So that relieves some cost in our water and wastewater side, and then of course it increases the budget in stormwater. That's a summary of those costs for each of those items. Any questions?
What's the one under miscellaneous outside services that jumped up pretty significant?
What page are you on?
I'm on page 32 under the stormwater. We had $120,000 last year, and we're budgeting $225,000 this year.
That's like the Weiser study, and we have other engineering firms that will do reviews for us. We expect going into our next cycle of our NPDES permit, and we expect to have an audit. And there's a firm that is helping. I forgot what's the name of that firm. Neil Schaefer, that will do some work. Anything else, Darren?
The map,
The mapping. That's the
$100,000 obligation on
for the
mapping update.
planimetric mapping.
And where, say, for instance, we've talked about Leaf Avenue, I know we've talked about the drainage issues and the stormwater issues that we have over there. Would that come under the engineering side or the street department, or would that come under the stormwater capital projects?
I think it's to be determined as far as the capital project. Right now, it's in the study phase, I believe. Is that? Yeah. So they're doing a study to find out what needs to be done, and then it could be determined where funds would be available to do those improvements.
Okay.
And right now we're doing about $250,000 of general fund, that's through the engineering department of the city that was identified in last year's budget.
In all likelihood, we'd be looking at the next TML loan to fund the Leaf Avenue improvements once the study's completed.
We were in a Parks and Recreation Commission meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about some of the improvements that we were going to do to Old Fort Park, and one of the members, questioned how that we had the money to do this, and I assured that member that we didn't start the stormwater management program as a money maker for the city, that it was something that we were mandated to do. But some of these capital projects that we have are part of our remediation process that we have to go through. Is that correct?
Yes. What we'll do is we've identified those projects and whatever projects the city would have, and then put those on a priority and fund those. Of course, this is only a year into this program where we would like to accumulate some funds so we don't have to borrow any money to do some projects. We'd rather fund those out of hand, and after we pay the next installment to the city, we'll have be able to accumulate some that we can do some projects out of our funds on hand, unless it's a very large project.
So the whole stormwater process is not something that you can look at just from the front side and feel like that it's apparent to see exactly, we're building up our reserves to be able to meet some of those mandates that we've been ordered to go through. Because I know we talked about, last year where we had the $2.2 million budget, and that was something that we were, mandated pretty much to bring that on. That's where the 3.25
Yes.
fee comes from that we're paying on our sewer bill.
And keep in mind, the goal from all this is to improve the stream so it comes off the impaired stream list.
All right, any other questions on the tentative budget of the Water and Sewer Department? Mr. Kirshner, again, thank you for an excellent presentation, and please share with the members of your staff how much we appreciate the work you've done in putting this budget together. And I know our ratepayers are very sensitive folks, and we appreciate the efforts that you make to make sure that we have the best water that we can have.
Thank you.
This time we'll go through the tentative budget of the Parks and Recreation Fund. Budget's on page 36 and 38, and the salary schedule's on page 105 to 112. Are there questions on the Parks and Recreation Fund?
Mayor, I might just point out the memo I distributed this evening had several changes to multiple departments. Parks and Recreation was one of those. The Parks and Recreation Director had recommended a reorganization of the department. The proposed budget did include $200,000 plus for salaries and benefits related to these changes, but we're going to study this proposal a little further. So at this point, we're going to recommend deleting that dollar amount, but come back to you later in the budget year to see what changes we might be able to implement, one of which is that currently Mr. Goodwin does not have an assistant director. That department has a tremendous workload, and right now it's operating with just Mr. Goodwin there, so that will be one of the items we'll want to talk about, looking at providing some additional funding for the assistant position there.
Line 29 on page 37 shows Park and River Trail police officers, and that looks like a change there in that budget number. Can you tell me where those officers are gone or going? Or
Mayor,
Yeah.
we used to have that in there because of a COPS grant, and that grant now has been completely audited and closed out, so we don't feel it necessary. That was done by journal entry only. Those officers were always under the control of the police department, but because they were put on the parks side for the grant, we had to indicate there it was just strictly a journal entry.
all right, it's just a flow-through dollar amount. All right. Questions then on the Parks and Recreation Fund?
Yeah. Mayor, there was two other pieces to the changes that we brought to you this evening. In addition to the reorganization that we will revisit later, additionally, there were 3 positions that were not in the budget that we've need to go ahead and fill. Mr. Trujillo will be retiring from Cannonsburg. We need a program coordinator to run that, and also there's 2 groundskeeper positions that were left out of the budget. The net cost of these 3 positions is $112,651. If you combine the 2 changes that we're recommending, it's actually a decrease of the transfer from the general fund to recreation of $87,942.
So, Mr. Lyons, it looks like we've got, based upon last year's budget and this year's budget, a $655,000 decrease in what we budgeted from last year.
Yes, sir. I think as we pointed out in our cover memo to council, we have tightened the belt. Virtually every single city department is going to be bringing you a budget that was less than we budgeted last year. We try to be very cautious to still provide service to the public, but we have tightened our belt. So the fact that you see a negative number in the difference in this year's budget versus last, you're going to see that in virtually every single city department. And the ones that do have an increase, there's usually a story behind it and why that is the case.
Other questions on Parks and Recreation Fund? Evidently, the Vice Mayor and Mr. McFarland are doing a great job there with no questions there. You know, they're doing a great job there.
We have a good commission.
Good appointments. All right, let's move on to the Golf Course Fund, and that would include the Old Fort Golf Course. Their budget's on page number 39 and 40, their salary schedule on 113, 115, and Veterans Administration 41 and 42, and there's the VA Golf Course, their salary schedule's on page 116. I notice we're doing some stormwater work at the golf course. I try to get out there to make sure that the cash flow is good at Old Fort Golf Course as often as I can for Mr. Wilkins' benefit.
Checking on the cash flow, Mayor.
Checking on the cash flow and just making sure it goes out of my pocket and into theirs. And they spend my money all the time out there. Any questions on Old Fort Golf Course or the VA?
Most of us give it repair.
And he's buying a lot of golf balls. I understand that line item.
Most of it.
Mayor, I know Mr. Wilkins can probably tell you a little more about this, but the Golf Commission 3 months ago went back and forth, and we recommended to council an increase in our fees, which we had not had since the renovation, and hoping that will help. You know, we're figuring another $110,000 worth of income this year, hoping that that'll offset, you know, some of the things that we have have coming through.
We have that increase is in place and has been received as well as could be expected anytime you increase fees or whatever, but it has been put in place and has been received well, and we hope that it does offset some of our expenses that we have coming up. Play is relatively steady for us right now over last year, which is a good sign. In the total national market, it's kind of down, so we feel pretty good about our position there. May was kind of rough with all the rain and stuff that we had, but Play and everything seems to be holding pretty steady for right now.
I noticed you haven't paid anything on debt service.
And we appreciate that. We do have that set in the budget to for the upcoming budget for this year.
Actually, we don't have it in there for next year. They have had some cash flow problems, and if it picks up, I would expect us to put it back. But in the meantime, we're going to cover that.
I think the last time you paid on the debt, and that's just a question a lot of people ask me, is the golf course self-supporting? And I think in that light, I think you've got $160,000 a year, which would be $13,000 a month or something like that you'd have to take out if you were going to pay the debt service back on the loan there. The city just covers that out of the general fund. Is that correct?
And I think we, at the Golf Commission, we've talked about that over the last several years. And one thing that keeps coming back that we talk about from the commission, that although the golf course is not a part of the Parks and Recreation Department, that we do hear that it is a benefit that the residents have gotten to where we've taken such good care of that golf course that the expectations are so high out there that we can't regress backwards. So although I think the industry joke about golf courses is who makes money in a golf course, and it's usually the fourth or fifth person who owns it after it's gone bankrupt 2 or 3 times. I think the golf course, we manage it as tight as we can, especially with the people that we have out there. So same thing when you look at with the VA golf course, that obviously that's from the open eye, it's a tough fund, but it provides a recreational opportunity that's not provided anywhere in the community.
About how many rounds are we getting a year? 18-hole rounds?
If you do it in 18-hole rounds, we're doing somewhere mid to upper 30s thousands, around 35 to 37,000 rounds.
So
usually somewhere around 45,000 starts.
So 35, 37, 38,000, something like that, 18-hole rounds. 18-hole rounds. If you were to charge $5 more per round, you could make that debt service payment. And I mean, it's not an exorbitant amount of money, but it certainly would be a stewardship issue with the taxpayers. And obviously, of course, if you look at the surrounding golf courses, golf is cheap in Middle Tennessee. I can tell you that from experience. But our golf course is well maintained and possibly deserves that higher dollar of income. Now, people may not agree with me, but it's a bargain to play at Old Fort right now. And I just hate to see us not making that commitment to keep the course as it is and to help us pay the taxpayers back for their generosity. But that's enough said on that subject. But it's in great condition right now. You're doing some stormwater improvements and some improvements around the lakes. And Joel has done a great job as a greenskeeper as far as I'm concerned.
We are. The stormwater project that's going on right now is it's going to end up being positive for us twofold. One, it's going to be a definite improvement in our stormwater quality right there by the golf course, plus the way it's being done is going to be an enhancement to a couple of the holes out there also.
Absolutely.
Mayor, something we talked about that may get your input on, that I had recommended that it, with not having an increase since the renovation, and then we had an increase this year, that we needed to come up with some kind of way to have budgeted increases each year instead of feast or famine. That this year I think we raised, was it $4?
We went from, it was actually only $1 on the greens fee, and we raised $2 on the cart fee. So we didn't really have that big of an increase on the greens fee. It's more onto the cart fee. So there is some room there. We are setting that up. We've only been into this increase right here for 3 months or so, and we are putting that together to have a steady increase, small as they may be, over the next several years, as opposed to waiting for so long. It has been 5 years.
Yeah. That's to at least where we can manage that increase, because I think the one thing that we looked through our budget, that our fertilizer costs have almost tripled over the last year, and it's something that we have to have. And Mr. Haley, I know that with your retirement come up in August, that you're going to have the VA well ironed out, because you said that was your one last thing you wanted to make sure to do before you left.
I think of the VA negotiations will be job security for Mr. Lamb.
It's a whole other debate.
My question,
10 years or 15.
how are we looking out there? I know we look at what it costs us to keep that and offset on what our fire service that we provide, but with the economic times where we are right now, I know we can't even bring it on. That acreage would be tough for us to even do anything on it right now, but is there any more news on the VA negotiations?
None.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Wilkins? If there are none, we'll go to the airport fund. Thank you, Mr. Wilkins, and please, again, thank your staff for what they do for our city. The airport fund is on page 44 and 45, and their employee salaries is on page 117. Any questions on the airport fund? If there are no questions on the airport fund, the solid waste fund, page 48, 49, and their salary schedules 119 to 122. Solid waste fund.
Mayor, this is one additional area where we have a recommended change. The solid waste budget had revenues in excess of expenditures of $152,770. This will be corrected by reducing the transfer from the general fund to the solid waste fund. Additionally, we failed to include any funding for overtime expenditures, so we are proposing $35,000, which was the amount we budgeted this year.
Council members, and this is possibly one to look at, you'll notice that their budget versus their estimate is about $400,000 in savings over what they were budgeted to spend. And I'd like to thank all of our department heads and our staff for the really the reductions that have been made in spending this year versus what their budget is. And this is out of a $5.6 million budget to come up with an estimate of $5.2 million obviously helps us get through a year that's was increasingly lean. And so I want to thank Mr. Lyons, Mr. Haley, and those department heads for reducing those expenditures so we could come in with a fund balance that you'll see later on that we are going to be utilizing this year. Any other questions on solid waste fund?
Mayor, if I could just brag on solid waste one more time.
Yes,
Obviously,
certainly.
they were one of the unsung heroes in the April 10th tornado. Talked to Mr. Smith today. In response to the tornado, they have picked up 16 million pounds of yard waste, and over 21 million pounds of building debris has been collected. So hats off to them.
Wow.
21 million pounds.
tremendous benefit to the community. Thank you, and thank you for coordinating those efforts too, Mr. Lyons. All right, if there are no questions on solid waste, we'll go to Fleet Services Fund 50 and 51, page 123, for their salary schedules. Fleet Services Fund.
We did have a change that's got a no net impact to the budget. We apparently had a typo in one of the operation and maintenance line items, but we're able to delete a part-time position that would not be necessary. So the net change will bring that back to you, but it'll net out to be no change to the bottom line.
All right, Fleet Services, any questions? In your budgeting, did you pretty well net the fuel virtually with the same thing in the budget from last year? Is that what you did on the fuel costs? I know it's not in this particular category significant, but for the fire department, police department, and those kind of things, how did you kind of budget the fuel costs?
Yeah, each department looked at what they expected to do in the upcoming year and budgeted in their own department what they were going to need for fuel. What's in here is for the fleet service vehicles.
So is it based on a rise in fuel rates that anticipated, or?
I think we generally had a consensus that fuel was going to go up, but not to the level that it did about a year ago.
It looks like you've gone back to 07, 08, maybe, and even budgeted under that for the fire department. Let's hope that works.
I think some of the departments, too, put in some new ways to handle, when they're allowed to go out in the vehicles and leave them running, or when they had to all go, or, they changed their methods a little bit, too, to conserve.
Good. Anything else on fleet services? If not, we'll go to community development, 52 and 53, and page 124 for the salary.
Mayor, your consent agenda this evening has a neighborhood stabilization grant that Mr. Callow is recommending to you. Should you approve that grant later this evening, when we bring you back the revised budget, we'll include the expenditures for that. Understand there will be no cost to the general fund for that, but that grant will need to show up in this budget.
What is the item 37 there, economic development?
Mr. Mayor, we're instituting a micro enterprise loan program for income eligible entrepreneurs. We're going to have a memorandum of understanding with the Tennessee Small Business Development Center and MTSU. They're going to do all the legwork, and then we're putting in money. I believe we've got $55,000 to set up a loan pool, which would be for bridge loans to help capitalize those entrepreneurs and get new businesses started here in Murfreesboro. And we'll be telling folks more about that later on this week.
And win a Nobel Peace Prize for.
Well, we're for that. It's been done, hasn't it?
It has.
Or economics or something like that. Yeah. All
right.
But that's what that's about.
So that's a grant. Those are grant dollars.
All of this would be, the economic development project would be from our community development block grant money, our regular CDBG money.
Okay. Any questions on community development before we go to the Senior Citizens Center?
Mr. Callow, I had circled that 08-09, we budgeted $500,000 for streets, and we used $100, and we're budgeting $315 this
Yeah,
year.
what that is our North Spring Street infrastructure project, and the timing is actually we came in under. We got a really great bid on that. So but the timing of it. When's our start date, Mr. Griffith? We're ready to. We took bids on that in February, and we got slowed down by the tornado. But we are going to issue the notice to proceed this month on that.
Great.
But there will be no new funding is required for that project.
Thank you. Other questions? If not, then the Senior Citizen Center Fund, Mr. Lyons, you had some changes there, is that correct?
Yes, sir. At the time we prepared the budget, we had indications that the county commission was going to cut funding to the senior center by a little over $7,700. Ms. Burt took that information and, through a number of line items, made corresponding cuts in that amount. As we began going through our budget review internally, we put a placeholder in the budget of program cuts related to the county. It shows up in your budget as additional reductions in that same dollar amount. So in a sense, we accounted for the county's cuts twice. The county did restore that money. So what we are recommending is elimination of that additional reductions line item of $7,750. That actually reduces the general fund transfer needed to balance the senior center budget.
And then, Mayor, there in council, there would be another recommendation in the senior budget, and that would be to increase what you see at $455,000 on line 10, 455,035, increase that amount to $474,720, which is an amount equal to the level budgeted this year. So we would be budgeting next year the same as we budgeted this. That would be a net change increase of $19,685. We would ask that you consider that.
All right. Any other questions on senior citizens? If not, Cable Television Fund, page 56 and 57, and their salary schedules on page 127. I notice that franchise fees are higher, more than budgeted, but obviously in line with what had been in previous years. Is that just a recapture or what?
We took a conservative approach last year, but the estimate for this year is tracking more in line with what we've seen in the past, and so we repeated that for this year.
Mr. Lyons, what's the interest calculation? Because we were down significantly from where we were the previous 2 years.
The rates have dropped significantly, too.
Interest income.
Mm-hmm. It's interest income.
Right.
Anything else on cable TV? All right, that concludes the tentative budgets for the departments and funds that we were to review at this time. Is there any other business to come before the council from staff or the council? If not, you're adjourned, and we will reconvene at our regular meeting at 7 p.m.